If Baylor and LSU play a game of football in the Texas Bowl, there's no way LSU can win. Let's get Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello there, Bears fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and The Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network here on YouTube. Appreciating you making it your first listen today and every day. Today, we're talking about the Texas Bowl, which is tomorrow, and the very thing that LSU cannot do. And if the Bears can force LSU into doing that thing they cannot do, there's no way that Baylor can lose. Plus, we're going to be joined by Zach Blackerby of the Locked On Auburn podcast to talk about Walker White, what Baylor got, what Auburn lost. All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Baylor. Texas Bowl tomorrow, January almost 1st. We call that December 31st in the Gregorian calendar. 2:30 Central Time, if I'm not mistaken, Bears and the Tigers. And of course, when you look on paper, the talk is going to be about LSU. LSU, they're the brand. They play in the SEC. This is scrubby little Baylor in their Big 12, and they started 2-4, and they sucked last year. There's no way they can hang with mighty LSU. And how about this? Garrett Nussmeier's coming back. He's playing in the game. LSU's got one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the country. That's why Vegas still has LSU as the favorite. Because you look deeper into the numbers, into the roster, they've got a lot of guys missing over there in Baton Rouge, man, that aren't making the trip to Houston, to NRG Stadium. How about 3 of their top 4 receivers? None of their tight ends that they actually use in games. Neither of their starting tackles. None of their free safeties. And yet, they're still giving LSU the points in Vegas. Giving them 1.5 last I checked. And College Football Insiders, which is the company that I use to really break down these numbers and get into the nitty-gritty of this, even they have LSU as 3-point favorites against Baylor, projecting 29 points to 26. Be an exciting matchup and giving LSU a 62% chance to win the game. So why then did I open this show by saying if they play a game of football, there's no way LSU can beat Baylor? Well, let me break it down for you this way. If this becomes basketball on grass, the way we talk about 6-man high school football in Texas, if this becomes basketball on grass or a track meet, it's going to be an absolute dogfight, but LSU might have the edge in that. Even though Baylor's had one of the best passing attacks in America the last 2 months and one of the best offenses in all of college football this season, if it's going to come down to that, LSU's going to win the game. And this is not a knock on Sawyer Robertson. Sawyer Robertson's a great quarterback, but you saw earlier this season, when they have to drop back pass every down, they're not successful. I look at that BYU matchup. I think Sawyer threw it 50 times. By the end, when you're coming back the whole game and you got to pass every down, that's tiring. I remember he missed a throw on 4th down that would have potentially given them the lead in that game. It's still not something that's very sustainable for Baylor to win. What Baylor did in this turnaround before the 6-game winning streak, going from 2-4 to 8-4, is they established the run. And they became one of the best running teams in all of college football. Whether it be the offensive line or Bryson Washington's emergence or Dawson Pendergrass's emergence or all of the above, Baylor became a damn good running football team. And you look at the other side with LSU, even when they had all their guys in there, even when they had their great offensive line, even when they had the top tackle prospect in the NFL draft playing for them every week, they suck at running the football. Any LSU fan will tell you this. I got LSU fans in my comments. They're not going to be sitting down there saying, hey, you're wrong. Baylor or LSU can run the football. They're not going to say that. Or else they really should be checked out. That's been the Tigers' problem all year long. And in fact, if they had a run game, they'd probably be challenging for the playoff. But they don't. And I know their depth is good, right? Look, I think the SEC probably gets a little bit overrated these days in terms of how they're looked at versus other conferences, but they're still the best conference. And the talent that comes through there is undeniable. Undeniable. And we've seen it before with Baylor in bowl games, mind you. Let's go back to Sugar Bowl 1 against Georgia when they had a couple of offensive lineman starters opting out. And you're like, finally, this is a great Baylor defense. They're going to take advantage of this. They were never in that game. Never in that game against Jake Fromm's Georgia Bulldogs. So it's bit them before. But the momentum that this team is going in with is unlike any we've seen in a while for Baylor going into a bowl game, right? Since I guess that's Sugar Bowl 2, but they were not on a 6-game winning streak, but they had just won the Big 12 championship. That was pretty good. But if this is going to be a game that's won in the trenches and won by how teams play the run and defend the run, Baylor's going to win. And that's what I mean by if this becomes a football game, Baylor has the advantage. If it's going to be a track meet, they might not. They don't pass every down as efficient a passing team as they are. Their success came when they could establish the run, which they have done each of the last 6 weeks against good run defenses, against bad run defenses, and everything in between. They've been able to do that. LSU cannot. They can't. Their offensive success rate, running the football, is barely top 100 in Division I. It's terrible. Baylor, on the other side, I was a little surprised. They're only 37th. And their defensive success rate against the run is top 10. It's 7th in America. So I've said this before about Dave Aranda. Has this been his best defensive job? No. This year? No. But I think they've played better. Going into these last, 3 weeks of the season or so, they've played a lot better. And they're great at tying one arm behind your back. They're going to beat you. Dave Aranda's always been that way. LSU fans, I know you know. If he can get you one hand tied behind your back, there's no chance you're going to beat him. And LSU already has tied a hand behind their back. Baylor didn't even need to do that. LSU's already done it. But look back to the Kansas game. Kansas had over 7 yards per play in that entire game. And yet they only scored 17 points and they lost by 4 touchdowns. Baylor forced a couple turnovers, 3 of them, and they tied a hand behind their back. Devin Neal's one of the best running backs in the Big 12. They said, Jaden Daniels, good dual threat quarterback. Let's see what happens if we make them pass it on every down. And that's what happened. Garrett Nussmeier is a better quarterback than Jaden Daniels in the NFL. He's not quite there, although he's going to pass Jaden Daniels' yardage total in his Heisman season at LSU. Garrett Nussmeier is a better quarterback than Jalen Daniels. But when you don't have 3 of your top 4 receivers in there, pass catchers, I should say, and you don't have your future NFL tight end in there, that already is tying a hand behind your back. And you've already tied a whole arm behind your back by not having your top 2 tackles and not having a run game the whole year. Baylor's going to force Garrett Nussmeier into a corner here. And if they can get after the quarterback, that's going to change this game. Now, I am skeptical of it because they haven't really gotten after the quarterback all year. They're barely top 70 in the nation in sacks. They had 1 great sack game with the 8 against Colorado, 9 against Colorado. And so you take that out of it, and they're really down there on the list of top sacks or most sacks in Division I. But you're looking at a team that needs more time, more protection for their quarterback, and less of their starters to protect them. You've got to get after them. Because LSU, I mean, they're bottom of everything in running the football in the SEC. They're last in rushing offense, bottom 3 in rushing touchdowns. And by the way, they're not much better rushing defense. They're in the bottom 4 of that. They're giving up 150 yards a game on the ground. And I've told you all season long that Baylor, that 150 is the sweet spot. If they're going to get 150 yards rushing, they're going to beat you. And if I'm not mistaken, they've done that each of the final 6 weeks in that 6-game winning streak. They're getting better by the game running the football. If this becomes a game in the trenches, which these matchups so often do, bowl games, 2 good teams, especially ones that aren't too familiar with each other. If this becomes a battle in the trenches, Baylor is going to win. And in fact, I'll go as far as saying if this becomes a game that is won and lost in the trenches, LSU has no shot against Baylor. No shot. That's why I really like the Bears in this game. I really do. I also really like Walker White and him joining on with the Bears. And so that's why I brought on Locked On Auburn's Zach Blackerby in order to talk about what Auburn is losing and also specifically what Baylor is gaining from getting Walker White. That is next on Locked On Baylor. But first, this episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Let me ask you this. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about? That's something that you were paying for twice? Because it definitely did that for me. And I like money. I like saving it. Rocket Money does that for me. It's a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps you lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place. I'm talking subscriptions, your spending habits, what you're spending on, and even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members like you, like me, up to $740 a year when using the premium features. But for me, it's the subscription tracker, okay? I found out I was subscribing to a couple things twice, subscribing to things I didn't use anymore. So that was huge for me. And I was like, that's already cut my budgeting down a ton. It saved me a ton of money already just in the couple of months here. Plus, they've got this goals feature. And so I've been able to automatically set aside money for my financial goals for 2025. They help me do that. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/LOCKEDON. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Here on Locked On Baylor, I have interviewed former coaches, radio hosts, former players, all people around the sports world. I have never interviewed my boss.
Oh, yeah, that's wow. How about that? Have we never done a show together? I guess we
never done one. Never done. Is it fair to call it an interview, though? This is a crossover. I'm not going to call it an interview anymore.
It doesn't feel like an interview. It feels like a chat between buddies about Walker White, former Auburn quarterback, now with the Baylor Bears.
Yes, that is Zach Blackerby of Locked On Auburn. I'm Cam Stewart, Locked On Baylor. Let's talk about Walker White. It was a huge commitment for the Bears over the weekend, right as the transfer portal window was closing. And it seems weird for people outside of Baylor to see, a former 4-star guy, top 3 dual threat quarterback recruit in the nation a couple years ago, coming into a program that has an established starter, that has a guy who is going to be back next year and going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12 next year. So, Zach, I want to get your reaction to that of, hey, here's a guy who seems to be running from the grind a little bit at Auburn, and now he's going to come and sit behind another established starter at Baylor.
Yeah, and I don't know if he's running from the grind. I definitely have seen that narrative from the Auburn side of this.
Seen a lot of it,
yeah. And I get it. But I don't think it's entirely accurate. So let's add context to this. This is
why we
guy,
bring you here.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's context this thing up. I think the assumption for Walker and a lot of Auburn fans going into this transfer portal window was, okay, Auburn's going to go out to the portal. They're going to get a guy with 1 year left of eligibility and say, okay, here's how we go with 2025. And then after that, it's going to be a competition between Walker White, former 4-star, and then Deuce Knight, who's a true freshman now, former 5-star. And let's just see what happens. Well, they bring in Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma, and he's a little bit younger and has more eligibility than what a lot of people were expecting going into this transfer portal window. So if you're Walker, I don't know if it entirely makes sense for this, but also just my understanding of the quarterback room as a whole, and I think it starts with Peyton Thorne, who was Auburn starter a year ago, to Holden Geriner, who transferred, to Hank Brown, who transferred, and obviously to Walker, who transferred. I don't think the quarterbacks were particularly happy with everything that went on. I think you could see that frustration kind of swell up on the sidelines from time to time last year. How much of that was scheme? How much of that was just not, scoring as many points as you're supposed to? I don't know. But overall communication seems to be questioned. with from Auburn players. And so we'll see exactly what happens with that moving forward. But as far as the context, like the timing doesn't make sense. And so he goes to Baylor, where it seems like there's a clear starter for this year. He's got 1 year left, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And then maybe he gets to compete for the job, which is kind of what he thought he was going to do at Auburn. So it makes sense. It makes sense why he picked Baylor.
Yeah. So this is, a team that had a hat on the table at Little Rock Christian when he was making his decision.
Yeah.
And it is interesting in terms of, let's put some more context into this. He enters into the portal, the beginning of the portal period, but after Jackson Arnold commits to Auburn. So there's kind of writing on the wall there, and he goes up until the very end of the portal. And so and I'm sure he had options. He's not one of those guys who posted every offer that he had, but I'm sure there was some interest there. And right away, we heard about an offer from Baylor and a visit to Baylor, and he weighs it all. And here he is coming to Baylor. And I mentioned at the beginning of this, running from the grind, there is a difference between that and a log jam. Like we have to appreciate that those are two different things.
Sure.
And you put out a tweet the other day about, hey, Auburn fans, how do we feel about this? How do we feel about the Walker White commitment? It got a lot of responses. What was the prevailing thought, or what is the prevailing thought and emotions around Walker White leaving and committing to Auburn or Baylor? Oof.
Yeah. I think I think it's split. I think a lot of folks are really excited about Jackson Arnold, and then presumably Deuce Knight being the guy after him in the future. And I think there are some folks that think Walker White, translates into this superstar quarterback, which he has the traits, and we can kind of go over what his traits are in a second. But I would say it's split. And look, this Auburn fan base, they've gone through some rough seasons over the last few years. And this isn't a fan base that's used to being down for this long. Auburn football is up and down over the last, however, but they haven't been down this long. In fact, normally when they're down, they compete for a national championship a year or two later. It's kind of a fascinating thing. It feels like we're so far from that right now, just as far as what the last 3 seasons have done. And they've got some more guys coming in, but it's just when you're losing, Cam, you want to point to everything and say like everything is so bad, which it's not, right? I think Auburn's close, but like Walker wasn't going to help you this year anyway. Like I don't think Walker White is ready to compete at the SEC level or the Big 12 level this year, but I do think he has traits where he could be developed and be a really, really solid quarterback.
I was thinking you were about to go with, he's not ready to compete in the SEC, but you guys out there, he maybe he gets a shot, but I'm glad.
I respect the Big 12 more than the average SEC person. I'll say that.
And it's not because Locked On Big 12 does such good numbers. Ball.
Man, if anything, Drake Toll makes me like the Big 12 less, if I'm being honest.
I think that's a shared sentiment, man, amongst a lot of people. Check out Locked On Big 12 every day, by the way. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Right. I do want to talk about, you mentioned, all right, so we know how the fans feel about what's his name? Walker White. There we go.
Nice.
And it goes both ways. They could feel divided on Walker White. I think Walker White feels divided on Auburn right now. And he does an interview with Pete Thamel about this commitment to Baylor. And he says, I'm excited to work with Coach Spavital in this Baylor offense. It feels like there's more of a plan in place at quarterback. I'm paraphrasing a little bit there. Was that a shot at Hugh Freeze on the way out the door?
I got to hear.
Please.
I'm also excited there's a clear plan for quarterback development, which is a buzzword on the Auburn side of things, because it's like, how often are people getting developed here at Auburn? They want to cast blame on Hugh Freeze. I'm like, I don't know if he's been here long enough to fully know that. And I'll probably jump into that on Locked On Auburn if you want to kind of hear more of that discussion. But this got people going. And I guess, once again, I think the Auburn fan base was split on how they reacted to this. I think one side was like, well, is he wrong? And the other was like, okay, this guy's been all Auburn since the day he committed. Everybody thought he was going to commit to Clemson. He ended up committing to Auburn. It was this big deal. And he's been all Auburn, been a big recruiter, a huge ambassador for the program. And so many folks are like, oh, okay, he's taking a shot out the door. Like, why would he burn this bridge or whatever? I don't think it was intentional. It sounds like he was asked for a quote, and he was just answering a few questions by Thamel. and Thamel doing what Thamel does. He knew what he was doing. Thamel knew what he was doing. I don't know if Walker knew what he was doing, because Walker is so savvy. He's so savvy. And that's kind of why I'm like, well, why would he say that? Because he's so good with media. He did a lot of interviews when he was a recruit because he knew he could send his message out to, hey, come play with me. He was so vocal about kind of being the face of that 2024 class. And a lot of the guys wanted to play with him. I think he's part of why Auburn had the best receiver class in 2024 with Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson and Bryce Kane and Malcolm Simmons. Which leads me to kind of ask the question, like, is as savvy as he is and as smart as Walker is, like, there's no way he knew that there wasn't a chance that was going to be grabbed by Thamel and put out there. So I don't fully know how I feel about it, but I know Walker and I know he loves Auburn. And so, like, I have a hard time seeing him kind of talking smack and shooting shots that direction. But I don't know. It's kind of hard to argue right now.
But Thamel knew what he was doing.
He's good at it. I know a lot of people don't like him, but he's good at what he does.
He's great, man. And I know that's been, kind of a contention with Auburn fans of this quarterback. And I've got people in my comments now saying they're never developing a quarterback again. They're just going to go in the portal. And who knows? That remains to be seen. So let's see what Baylor's getting, what Auburn is losing next. Zach Blackerby, Locked On Auburn podcast, and this Locked On Baylor, Locked On Auburn crossover. Zach, what have we won? What is Baylor getting with Walker White? I know there's going to be plenty of Auburn fans who are going to say he ain't anything going out the door, but there's a reason why he was such a highly touted prospect and why you said, kind of the face of that recruiting class for Auburn.
Yeah, I think Walker could be a really good player. The only con for Walker White's scouting report to me is like, I just don't think he's ready for 2025. He wasn't ready last year. They kind of eased him in. They put him in garbage time at one of those non-conference games late in the year. I don't think he's ready to compete or be a starter this year. But you look at the traits, and it's all stuff that projects well to be, a solid college quarterback in the future. He's big, he's tall, he's strong, he's athletic, he's really good with his feet. He's got an arm and can throw it a mile. And it seems like his accuracy from when we saw him in the spring versus the little bit that we saw him in the fall seemed like he took a step forward. His teammates love him. Sounds like he earned some respect by the way he ran scout team this past year. I think there's a lot to like about Walker. We did hear a lot in the spring that like he was the word that the coaching staff used was like swimming, which is like, I guess a lot of information was thrown at him and he was like taking him a little bit of time to adjust. Yeah. I never heard that term that way. I did a segment on that back in the spring, but it does seem like the game slowed down a little bit for him. But you got to think, this is a guy who played private school ball in Arkansas, and he goes straight into the SEC. Like there is going to be
6A Texas high school football.
It's different. Yeah, that's not the same thing for sure. So it's a pretty big jump. I don't know if you expected him to come in and start, which I know some people did. I don't know why they thought that, but like I don't know if you're being incredibly fair to yourself or to Walker, but give him a year to where the path to him being the guy is pretty clear a year out. I think that's how like the best way you can develop a quarterback is like, all right, learn everything you can, be a sponge because he's going to ask the right questions. He's going to take all the notes. He's going to be a guy who, absorbs all of this, whatever Baylor throws at him. I think him sitting behind y'all's starter this year makes a ton of sense, and give him a chance. Give him a chance to throw him the keys for 2026. I think that's a reasonable timeline.
So from the Auburn perspective, you talked about how it's going to be a battle between he and Deuce Knight, not only for next year, but really kind of the next couple of years of the Auburn program. Is it a better scenario to be in having that scenario that you laid out, or Jackson Arnold, who you've got now, plus Walker White? Which one would Auburn fans like feel better off with?
I think with the addition of Jackson Arnold, and let's assume you get Jackson for 2 years, there's a chance that Jackson's great and he goes to the league after this year. I don't think that's the most likely option. So let's assume we get Jackson Arnold Auburn for 2 years. If that's the case, I think within those 2 years, at some point, Deuce Knight would have hopped Walker White. That's just my gut reaction. And so like Auburn, I think, was thrown off by Walker entering the portal. I think they expected Holden Gerner to enter the portal. I think they expected Hank Brown to enter the portal. The Walker White news, it surprised me. And the timing of it happening shortly after Jackson announcing, like, it certainly feels like the two were tied. We don't know that. That's purely speculation. But I think if Jackson were to be the guy for 2 years and you had Walker and Deuce competing for the backup spot to be the heir apparent after Jackson Arnold leaves, I think it would have been Deuce Knight at some point hopping Walker. That's just my gut reaction.
Gotcha. So let me then ask you this, because you say Walker's not ready, and thankfully, Baylor's got a starter.
Yeah,
The
timing makes sense. 100%.
That he can learn under. But Jackson Arnold, we see a guy who played in the SEC for the first time this year. Obviously, OU really mortgaged their future there. They kind of more or less pushed Dylan Gabriel out the door, and he probably going to win a national championship this year. Arnold's a guy who got benched this year on a 6-7 team. Is Jackson Arnold ready for the SEC?
Yeah. I think when you look at the situation that Jackson Arnold was in last year, like Oklahoma, every receiver they had, it seems like they got hurt. I'm pretty sure they asked some of their water boys, like, can you run a route? Can you run a 10-yard in? Just
I got a DM. I got a DM from.
Did you? They
Brent.
asked you. Yeah, they asked you. They checked on your eligibility. Yeah. And same with offensive line. And Oklahoma going into last year was already replacing their entire offensive line already. And I remember being in SEC media days, like, why is no one talking about this? Like, this is important. Like, oh no, they've recruited. I'm like, I don't think it matters. And it didn't. And they had a bunch of injuries on top of it. So, I mean, it's kind of a similar situation to Auburn. It's like, were guys put in situations to succeed? Like, was Jackson Arnold put into a situation to succeed last year? And he wasn't. But then when his number was called in the biggest game of the year outside of Texas, they beat Alabama and they used him as a running back. They just ran him over and over and over and over and over again. So he's got the ability. My question isn't fit, because I think he's got the receivers to throw to. I think Auburn's going to have one of the better receiving cores in the conference. I think their offensive line is top half. Their running backs are fine. Can it work within the scheme? Can it work within Hugh Freeze's RPO scheme? I think that's what it's going to come down to.
Okay, now let me play a little bit of devil's advocate here, because I just kind of laid out why Jackson Arnold might not be ready, and so that's a good non-biased for the Auburn fans, unbiased perspective. So now I call on you for an unbiased perspective here.
Okay,
I've talked about all the positives of Walker White coming in, basically like grabbing another one of the top quarterbacks in high school football, essentially, with the 4 years of eligibility remaining and how highly rated he was. But he also entered the portal after 1 year at Auburn, and you laid out a scenario where he could have been battling for the starting job next year. Could have been. So is that a red flag to Baylor fans that, hey, you think you've got this great shiny new toy, but he did just leave another place after 1 year?
Maybe. And like, I talk about this all the time.
Flag, maybe.
Maybe. My gut is no. I don't think it's a red flag, and I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything negative about Walker, just because I respect the young man that he is, and he's come on my show, and like I think he's a very well put together guy that you want in your football program. I would have loved for him to compete for quarterback 2 at Auburn this year. They brought in Ashton Daniels. I would have loved for them to compete. I think that would have been a great situation for Walker. He didn't seem interested in that. Was it NIL? Was it fit? Was it personality within the staff? I don't know. But I've heard from several players, Cam, several players within Auburn's program, that communication from the top to offensive players was frustrating. And that could have played a part. That could have played a part in all of this. And maybe he wanted a fresh start. Maybe he wanted to play in a different type of offense, because there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions about Hugh Freeze's offense right now. Do you need a very specific type of quarterback to run it? But also, like, I don't think Walker is very smart. He's a very smart kid. And I think he's very aware. And when you've got a guy that's coming in behind you, who's one of the highest rated players you've ever brought in at the quarterback position, he may be the highest, Deuce Knight. It's like, you can't not play that guy. You just can't. And I don't think it's anything against Walker, but like all the things we just listed about Walker, smart, athletic, got an arm. It's like Deuce is probably better at all of those things. So we'll see. We'll see over time. And I just think over 2 years, I think Deuce would have hopped him.
But we're getting a good dude here.
Yeah, strong Baylor man.
Love to hear that. Love to hear that. Zach Blackerby of the Locked On Auburn podcast. I appreciate you hopping on with us and talking some Walker White, what Baylor's gained, what Auburn has lost. I don't think he will be lining up against the Tigers week 1 next year.
But I do think he'll be lining up against the Tigers in 2026.
You think so? That second go around on the Plains, the return.
Wouldn't that be wild? Wouldn't that be incredible?
It makes a ton of sense. Is that week 1 in 26 as well? Do we know?
I don't know if they've announced that or not.
Yeah.
But my gut says yes. I hope so. For
Early,
the sake of
anyway.
the cinema, I hope so.
Oh, that is going to be great. We're gonna have some great crossovers this August, but that next August is going to be
who wins the trade? Who wins the trade between Auburn and Baylor? We received Jarrett Stidham.
Yep.
You guys receive Walker White. Who wins the trade? Cam Stewart.
I think Baylor's going to win that trade eventually.
Wow.
Walker White is going to take the Baylor Bears to the playoff, and that will be a one trade. And here, can I throw one more at you?
Please.
If we're going to extend this here, this trade, this great relationship that Baylor and Auburn has had.
Sure.
Davion Mitchell did bring a national championship.
Gosh.
To Baylor.
I forget about Davion.
That's a win, man. Hal Presley.
That dude was locked down. What's the name of the defensive coordinator we got from y'all?
Ron Roberts, baby.
Yeah,
this is the Locked On Auburn host. That shows you the staying power that Ron Roberts had at Auburn.
Well, like
Kevin
he had
Steele.
such a successful stint for. Oh yeah, Kevin Steele. He was absolute nails, my guy.
I think you guys won that part of the trade. I would say.
The Davion Mitchell winning a natty. It's kind of hard to argue against that. Jarrett Stidham won an SEC West championship, and if the running back Kerryon Johnson hadn't gotten hurt, I think we make the playoff that year. But all right, what a fun relationship between Auburn and Baylor. Good stuff.
It's great, and we both got to watch Jarrett Stidham shine on both levels, rooting for him at both levels.
Yeah, go Pats. Go Pats. Jarrett Stidham forever, baby. Let's go.
Number 1 pick. It's in our hands. I can't wait. Maybe we'll do a crossover for that. I don't know. Zach, thank you so much. I appreciate it, man. I'm so happy to see what the Bears are getting in Walker White.
Yeah. We'll talk more this summer, I'm sure. Locked on Auburn, Locked on Baylor. Let's get it.
Let's go.